Declaration of peculiar interests. None noted. Number 4, we'll go right to the 2019 draft budget. With that, I will hand it over to you, Donna.
Okay, thank you, Reeve Bailey. Okay, so welcome to the first budget meeting for the 2019 draft budget. So you've had your budget for a few days, and I had printed you a hard copy because I realized the print is very small. So our first, yeah, you need your glasses, sometimes magnifying glasses. For the next round, though, I was going to say, now that you've had a bit of a look at it, round 2 of our budget discussions, I'm going to remove the 2017 numbers to be able to enlarge the pages because you'll have seen them once. Normally, we just keep the year before and the year we're working on, but just because you're new, I wanted to give you a little bit more information. And as I said, we'll remove those next round. So the first draft of your budget, as you will have seen, we're looking at a 19.69 spending increase. We talked about that, not to get alarmed. That doesn't mean that that's what the tax increase would be. That's just increase in dollars. We have a lot of work to do, of course, and sometimes we've started as high as 30%, 40%, even 50%. So this is totally not unusual. The thing that we did a little bit differently this time than what we would do with a more seasoned council is the staff would have met and already made the cuts, a lot of cuts before you would have seen it. We didn't want to do that this year because we want you to see where we're thinking projects that we know that we need to do, but are going to have to come out just to make the budget work. So some of those types of things, normally in another year would already be done by this point, but I just wanted to clarify that for you. So we're still in the last few days, senior staff have been doing a lot more research and we have a lot of numbers still coming in. So as I said, we're in the very preliminary stages. So as I talked about the next draft, removing the 2017 numbers. And again, the 2018 actual numbers were very, very preliminary. They will be finalized more to mid-February. So that's when we'll have our final numbers in. And so the drafts that we're looking at that point will be very close to our final. The OMPF grant allocation, we've talked about that a little bit. We know we can't pass this budget until we get that information. So we're hoping that information is forthcoming. I believe the county treasurer is sitting on a working group and they're all working on trying to see what the impacts could be, but we had no indication how drastic that is going to be. One of the things we have to look at as we move through, and Trevor, I was going to say, we're not going to do policing tonight because we won't have time tonight. We'll do it tomorrow night. But a big part of our budget is research that we're trying to do on grants and some of the exit costs. We're still trying to finalize some of those. So we've put in what we know, but we are in contact with different organizations just to firm those numbers up as well. And also after the budget was sent out, I got my insurance adjustment numbers, so those will be worked into the next round as well. Also next round, we do all our year-end transfers to and from reserve, and we do an in-depth discussion on all of our reserve, what's in them, why they're in there, and that takes on a whole discussion on itself. So that'll be part of one of the next meetings. Something that I want you to give a little bit of thought to is donation requests. So part of the economic development budget, we have a small amount of funding for donation requests, and those are things like horticultural, firefighters, the Belgrade School Fair, some of those. So I'll give you a list of those, how much money they're looking for, how much money we have in the budget. I believe we also received a letter from the festival and St. John's Ambulance. So we get lots of donation requests and we can only accommodate what we have money to do. I talked to you a little bit last week about borrowing costs, so that we'll talk about that again tomorrow night. And the other thing to talk about, I'll mention it to you briefly tonight, but tomorrow night we can talk about it further, is in our HR policy, it outlines the annual staff wage increase and the formula on how to calculate that. So that is calculated by the months, previous average 12 months, October of the previous year to September of the current year. And so when we started our budgets, that number wasn't posted. So we used 2%, and that 2% actually, when the numbers were up, is 2.2. So a 2% increase across the board is for wages is 68,174.94, and 2.2 is 74,992.44. So an increase of $6,817.49. So I just wanted to be clear that in the budget that you have in front of you, a 2% increase has been worked into that. So moving on, our next steps are to complete the review of our first draft tonight and tomorrow night. And if we need one night next week, then we will schedule a meeting, possibly next Wednesday night. We'll see how things go, and we can determine whether we need that to get all the way through the budget once. Then we want to have a discussion with you folks on priorities, and you know, at that point you'll have been through the budget once, and things that you feel need to be left in, or things that you could you would be happy to see taken out, and that sort of thing. So we'll definitely have some time for that. Before the second draft of the budget, and I'm aiming for February 10th, 11th, maybe mid-February, somewhere in there. The department heads will have prepared their cuts and changes that they feel they could make to the budget as well. So they'll bring those to you in order to get the percentages to where we need to get it. So once the budget is acceptable, then it's ready for adoption, and we pass it at a regular meeting. And so what happens there is I do a presentation for the public, giving them a high level, probably half-hour presentation on what is left in the budget. So we do that before we actually pass the budget. And then at the next meeting, then we bring forward the bylaw to adopt the tax rates that are a result of the budget. So that's just kind of how all of that flows through. So for tonight, we're going to start and hopefully touch on or get through some of these budgets. So we have the general government budget, council, administration, fire, and CBO, because both Marty and Kurt can only be with us tonight. So we want to make sure that we get them through tonight. And then Sean has the biggest budget of all. So we'll get started with Sean and see how far we get along through his water, sewers, storm, airport, cemetery, waste, streetlights, all facilities and parks. So we'll see how we get along. We may have to end up splitting Sean's part and then picking it up again tomorrow night due to the closed session that you now have added to the agenda. So what we will do, instead of working till 9, we'll work till 8:30 tonight, and then you'll have that half hour for closed. I'm hoping tomorrow night, depending on how tonight's goes, we could maybe push on to 9:30. We could work a little longer if you're ready. I stay here till 11, Trevor's fine, but nobody else wants to stay with me. So anyway, we'll see how it goes. Anyway, so then tomorrow night we're looking for the policing costs, and that'll be a discussion. And Trevor, you're going to present that for the information that we know now. Then we'll have recreation, daycare, economic development, planning, our borrowing costs, area rating, capital, which will be our big discussion. And we'll talk about the wages again. And then again, I want to, tomorrow night, if there's time, I want to start hearing some of the priorities that are coming out from you folks after having been through the budget once.
Donna, can I just ask you then tonight, I know everybody's got some questions they have. So when I was on council before, we would just, through the chair, we would ask questions in the middle of your deliberations. Would you prefer that tonight or another night and you just want to speak?
Oh, no, we're like, I'm going to do the 3 budgets, and as I said, if there's questions that you have for me through those, then I'll certainly take them and we'll answer them. If it's something I have to go look up for you, then I can tell you, give you the answer tomorrow night sort of thing. And then, once we turn it over to the same Kirk and Marty. So no, certainly I think it's more opportune if you ask your questions now, because by tomorrow night, we might have forgot what they were, so.
So just to everybody that's the first time out there, don't be afraid to ask a question. There's no question that's silly. Somebody that's done it a few times might think, why did he ask that question? But I'm one that believes ask the question now, not after the budget's passed. Don't be afraid to put your hands up, and we'll have a good night tonight.
For sure.
This will be the toughest budget you will do in the next 4 years. We have some headaches ahead of us this year.
For sure.
So don't be afraid to speak up.
Thank you. So then, as we move through, I just wanted to mention, and that's exactly right, Bernie, is that we have some heavy hitting that we need to get done this year. So just a few things, if you just even think for a minute, the work that's involved to do the listing that we've been talking about off and on over the last couple of weeks, like building the new fire hall public works station, that's going to be a tremendous amount of work. We've talked about reconstructing Carling Street and the North Street project in Blythe to accommodate the development, the tar and chip work in East Wawanosh, finalizing the EST sale, and our trusty CAO brought the big check home with him today, so it's safely in the vault, so that's good. We have to finalize our transfer to the OPP, so there could be some more meetings, and there's definitely more information we need to get that finalized. If we get the rec master plan done, and depending what direction you go on the strategic plan. So that in itself is a lot of work right there that we would be hoping to get done this year in some form so that we can move forward, keep moving North Huron forward. So at this point then, I'm going to launch into the individual budgets. And so we will start tonight with the general government budget. Now we have, I wonder if this is going to come up there.
Don, what page is that? Do you know offhand?
In your printed one, it's 10, but on your iPads, this is something that we have to deal with. So iPad has its own numbering system, and then when I have the budget already numbered, the budgets don't match up. So if you're having any trouble with that, please let me know. Okay, so it's not coming up. I'm not sure why. I have it up on my screen here.
Are we hitting it?
Well, we'll try it in another way. Mine's fine here on the screen, but I don't know why it's not coming up. Never had that happen. So. Oh yeah, it's plugged in because we had the PowerPoint. Maybe what I'll try to do is unplug it again. Do you? I love this computer though, so I don't want to hurt it. Can't live without her. Okay, well, maybe what I'll do is I'll shut this down.
Start again.
Do you know why I would be doing this, Kurt?
Do you want the budget that you emailed it to us in the PDF?
Yeah,
I'll save it to this stick.
yeah, I don't know why it isn't, because it didn't give me any trouble before, but it worked for you. Okay, well, we'll get started then while he brings me over his stick. So the first one that we were going to look at tonight is general government. So in the general government, and so in your books, it would be on page 10. And so I'm just gonna go over this quickly with you to tell you what is in the budget. So under revenue items, then there's two items in particular that I will do some more research on and make changes for round 2. But if you're looking at the revenue we have revenue for licenses and permits for $6,500, and that's when we sell lottery licenses and taxi licenses. Marriage licenses, as you know, we sell marriage licenses for $100. Civil marriages, we have the opportunity, we have officiants on staff that perform that, and people come in and buy that service from us. We earn various interest income on our bank accounts, and last week I gave you a listing of our bank accounts and how much money was in all of those bank accounts. So some of the interest I have to transfer to other departments, but I'm going to take a second look and see if I can't bump that up for round 2. Penalty and interest on taxes, I've budgeted $70,000, exactly the same as last year. The year before, we had brought in $84,000, and last year $66,000. You're never just quite sure how many taxes are not going to get paid. We do budget for interest on accounts receivable programs. Sometimes we get them. It's a very small amount, $250, and that's usually on drainage bills that haven't been paid. Our miscellaneous revenue in 2018, the actual is actually higher than what it is. There was some things posted there that I have moved out. So miscellaneous revenue, again, you never know how much you're getting, but it's for the commissioner signatures that we sign at the counter for the vehicles and the flags and selling of books, and that's the type of thing that goes through that miscellaneous account. The transfer from reserve, the last couple of years we have had a transfer from reserve, and this was, and we don't this year, and it's to do with the police. So we used to take money out of the, there's two things we got from Westerio interest and Westerio dividend. So every year we had been in the practice of taking the Westerio interest and using it in our budget to offset the policing costs. And then you would see that same amount on the policing page. But when we get to the policing part this year, you'll see that we've completely wiped out the whole Westerio amount of funds. Admissions and rentals, so I'm going to increase that for the second draft. That's where we get the $110 that we get for courtroom rental of this room, and for the farmland properties that we rent out. So we're ready to take a look at those leases again. I think they come due in 2019. So we rent out to farmers, Hutton Heights, we rent out properties at the landfill, the sewage lagoon, and also we get revenue because if you've ever noticed, we rent solar panels out at the lagoon. So that's what makes up our admissions and rentals category. Our unconditional grant, the OMPF. So as we've had a few discussions about this, so I left the same amount as last year, $1,395,000 in. The news is saying that there's going to be drastic cuts. So Of course, until we know how much that is, we're not going to be able to pass our budget. And it's probably one of the biggest concerns I have at this point in this budget. Tax certificates, when properties sell, the lawyers pay us $50 to get a certificate to see if the person's taxes are up to date. And so you never know how much money you're going to get. It depends on how many of those you issue. Supplemental revenue, as you know, we don't have a great amount of supplemental revenue. So that's for buildings that occur mid-year and then they send the tax bill out for that. So we have had so little building that we're not seeing a whole lot of money on that, but it's offset by people who appeal their taxes. So one of the things that we found, particularly in 2018, and you farmers will understand this, is that some of the farm properties, for whatever reason, were returned on the roll, and we used that assessment at the residential rate. They hadn't filed their paperwork properly. And so then later, and we don't know when we get the budget done whether or not they're going to qualify for the reduced rate. And so what happens is then when they do get their paperwork, then they get a big write-off. And so then therefore that offsets, say if we had a new house, the write-off for the farm property would far outweigh the dollars that we have to give back for that than what we collect on the house. So that's been an ongoing trend. Payments in lieu, we talked about this a little bit last week. Payments in lieu are payments on properties. It's payments for taxes, but it's a different avenue. And those are for government properties like Canada Post and the LCBO. Actually, the landfills fall under this category, and there was new legislation passed that dramatically increased the taxes on the landfill. So the landfill budget has to actually budget and pay the taxes, but it pays it over to the municipality. So it is in and out, but it still in the end is an expense for the landfill, which we're trying to appeal that assessment to see if we can get that lowered. So that is everything in the revenue side of general government. So if we move on to the principal or to the expense side, so we have principal and interest payments, and again, last week we talked about those principal and interest payments, and these are for the grader, the roads project, and the rink grant. We will be paying the EST off on Friday now that the money came in, so those payments will be no longer. And then all the fire payments, though, show up under the fire portion. Marty will be speaking to those. So these are those other ones. Transfers to reserve dedicated for asset management. So in our discussions, we talked about that we have a $215 million replacement cost on our assets, and we've been trying to put money away to be able to replace those assets in the future. So our asset management plan was updated in 2016 and made that recommendation. So in 2018 was the first year that we were able to, no, actually 17 we did as well. We were able to put $126,000 away for future in 17 and then again in 18. So that's not money earmarked for any particular asset. It's trying to plan for the future and get some money put away. So that's what that one's for. The physician recruitment, the $33,000, I don't have their budget yet, and I think Anita, you're on that committee. So I'm sure they'll be holding a meeting shortly, and then they send us a copy of the budget as to what our share would be. The environment and energy program, that used to be for the tree planting program, and I think we're discontinuing it this year, but we're still hoping to undertake some other energy and environment initiatives, and we have a small amount of money to work there, $3,500. And the last item under the expenses is $10,000 for a strategic plan. So I'm not sure if Dwayne has given you much information on that or not, but there is the possibility of us being able to undertake a strategic plan this year. And the county has a consultant coming to work at the county level And he will also work with lower tiers, and the cost for that was $10,000. So it's something there's been no decision. Obviously, you haven't made any decision on this or had much discussion, but at least you have $10,000 in the budget to, if you choose to go that route, then you would be able to pay for that. So that's general government. Did you have a question?
Right, Chris.
Through you, Reeve. You got it. Okay, you've mentioned penalty on taxes. How about arrears? Do we have a figure for that, or is it public? Or?
We do. I didn't bring it with me tonight, but I can run over to my office and grab it.
It'd be nice to know at some point.
Sure.
Well, no, don't do it yet.
I can lay my hands on it in a minute. So what I'll do is, once I'm done and Sean's talking, then I'll run over and get it, and then I'll tell you what that is.
Okay.
For sure. No problem. Okay, Trevor.
Read through you. I have a concern about the physician recruitment, and it's not about the actual budget. What my concern has been, it has been North Huron contributes a significant amount of money to that committee for physician recruitment. There's a substantial reserve that they have in their budget that indicates how much money they have for recruitment of physicians. My concern has been, there's been nothing ever been communicated from that committee to this council or any other council who provides that, is what's the ceiling? What's the ceiling in the reserve that committee is expecting to promote or to get physicians? And the concern I have with that is if that money is being provided by the taxpayer and then it's been pushed over to the physician recruitment committee and it sits in a budget and it sits there for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, in essence, we're taxing them before they even need the money in order to get the physician recruitment. And the concern I've always had is, I'm okay with physician recruitment, and I think it's a vital importance of our municipal government. The concern I have is there's been no direction about what's the ceiling. What is that committee, if the committee thinks that at that point they need $250,000, then once we get to $250,000 in the reserve, then the municipality's budgets would start to ease off in the sense where that, whenever there was a need for those recruitments and we needed to come back to it, then those budgets can be reaffirmed. But the conversation's always been, let's provide $33,000 to them. And my issue is, and we have had some significant successes over the past 6 to 8 months, a lot more than we had 3 years prior to that. So what I'm saying is, I think we're doing good things. I just think this council needs to understand, or at least from my perspective, is what is the reserve threshold that they're running at, so we can make sure we're using taxpayer money effectively.
It just so happens, yesterday I was at a meeting with the hospital and about the reserves and the conversations you're having. There was a drought for quite a while where they weren't recruiting any, but I believe it's 3 they've recruited this last little while, as you said, Trevor, and it drained the account. They have used the money and they've used it wisely. And we had this conversation yesterday, and we have 2 physicians that will be retiring here in the Wingham Hospital in the next 2 to 3 years. So they need to build that back up so that they can recruit more. It's a situation where all communities do it. So we have to play the same game, or we're not going to get physicians. But you're absolutely right. For the longest time, nothing happened, but all of a sudden, they just bonused on some people that were willing to move to North Huron and become doctors, and it is now sitting on empty. They had mentioned they may want to ask for a little more when they come this time around, but I've already kind of deterred them from that. So just it has been properly used. I understand what you're saying when it hits a certain level, but that, again, because of the amount they're asking for from all the different communities, that's a long ways off, and they already know they're going to need it in 3 years' time.
Yeah, and that's great, Reed. But I guess from our perspective is that, when we get the budget, it would be a positive note that the councils understand what the threshold is going to be. You know, I understand you can go 10 years and just keep piling in, and you know, 1 year you could drain it out, and I get that. It's just that there's never been anything communicated to this council or any council that I've been associated to that tells me what the goal is from a reserve budgeting perspective on recruitment, because I know it changes from whoever you're trying to recruit, but what does that threshold look like? So, you know, I think it's just a matter of information, because I know that committee talks about it, but I just don't know if that talking has been relayed on to council as to what their goals are and how they see those goals. That's all.
So what we'll do there is we'll ask them to come to council and talk to us. They can present to us, okay?
Yeah, I think it's important that the council will see, here's it. So,
Go ahead.
I'm in the committee, so I will certainly ask that. I will have a meeting with Jenna Cake next week sometime, talk about it, and next meeting is, I think, in February sometime, and I'll get back to council about that.
We'll leave it in your hands then.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so is there any other questions on general government? And we're getting nowhere on getting this screen now, so I'm not sure
I
why.
lend you mine, but I can't get it up either.
So, well, we'll see how it
It's
goes.
sitting in my little package here. I can't get it up.
Okay.
My computer won't work tonight, guys.
All right. Okay, I'll carry on then. Okay, so then we're going to move on to the next one then after general government. So it actually shut itself off. Is council. Okay, and so then that is on your page 11. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about this. So under council budget, we have an overall increase of 24,000. The honorarium portion is up 20,000 from last year, 72,000 to 92,000. But the biggest part of that difference is your meeting pay. And last year there was about 52,000 for honorarium and 20 for meeting pay. I have grossed up the honorarium to provide council with the same net pay after the 1/3 tax exemption is taken away. So that was only $4,300. So the total honorarium is only $56,000. But when I started really looking at the budget, I ended up really increasing the meeting pay portion from approximately 20,000 to 36,405, or up about $16,000. And the reason for that is I started going through and counting some of the special meetings that you folks are going to be up against this year. And alone in January, you will have had 4 $100 meetings apiece. And so, you know, if we have some more meetings next week, and then I kind of had a list of things such as, of course, we have budget and the transfer to the OPP, but new meetings that weren't in the amount of meetings from last year are things like meetings to get the new building built. We have to have meetings to put in the strategic asset management policy that I talked to you about. And if you go ahead with a strategic plan, and then all the special meetings that you've had for orientation are all over and above new types of meetings than what council had last year. So I'll take a second look at it, but that is why that is up, not so much because of the council honorarium, but because of the number of meetings I think you folks are going to be faced with this year. Now, if you also do want to have a discussion on increasing council salary in addition to the grossed up salary that we talked about, that is definitely, there will definitely be time to have that discussion as well. So I'm not sure if anybody has any comments on that right now, but.
Don't see any, Donna. Oh, here are Trev.
I do have a concern about the not so much the honorarium, but the fact of the meeting pay discussion. The concern I have is that budget in 17 and 18, so I'm trying to think when shared services was talked about. And when shared services was talked about, the meeting pay discussion was increased because we were going to have a significant number of different meetings with regards to shared services. My concern is that the actuals, other than the first 6 months of getting this council oriented to meetings and whatever, there hasn't been any new meetings added that I would suggest that would be significantly more amount in dollars. That's only for when I'm thinking at a high level. I don't see $20,000 or even $16,000 in meetings. That's a lot of meetings.
It is, yeah.
So, I think we need to be cognizant of that. And as council, we need to be cognizant of the fact if we don't need a meeting, we shouldn't have it. And that's the part for me. I think that's, a $70,000 budget or a $72,000 budget should be lots in my mind to operate the council as even a new council. Like 69,000 we had for honorarium and meetings for an existing council, and some of those meetings aren't the adding of those new meetings to new councilors is not any different than meetings not being attended by long-standing councilors. So I just think that's excessive. I think we do definitely need to look at that line item.
So we'll cut that back for next draft and maybe cut it back to say, see what 2 meetings a month extra looks like or something like that. So I'll make a note of that, and that's why I just wanted you to have some discussion on that. Okay, the next piece there is for travel and training and workshops. So last year's budget was $20,000. This year I've increased it slightly again with the number of workshops and things that council may have to go to. So I've increased it by a total of $3,500. And that includes, you're allowed a total of $2,500 for convention and convention expenses. It doesn't include your per diem to go to the meeting, but it's the hotel and the registration and the train and all that sort of thing, and mileage. And then, so that's 7 times the 2,500. And then in addition to that, the council bylaw calls for group training of $2,500. And then I've added in some for mileage. So again, I think with all that you're going to have to be dealing with there this year, I can, maybe shave $300 or $400 off of that. But I think you're going to be looking at a lot of training meetings this year for sure. So then finally is council contingency. And so council contingency is the council's opportunity in the budget to take advantage of any unforeseen items that takes place or that council wishes to support and pass by motion. So all through the year, you will have different groups and different things come before you that are outside the donation budget, asking for council to waive fees, give a donation. There's different things that come up. In 2018, the bulk of that money was actually spent on new iPads for council because those hadn't been planned when the budget was passed back in March. And so that's what that money was used for. And there was one new donation request. But all of those items come to council for their discussion before they give that up. So that is the council budget. So as I said, we'll relook the meeting allowance portion of the honorarium for next meeting and see if we can cut some money off of that. And so if there are no questions, then I'm going to move on to the administration fund. I don't know, Sean, do you want to take a kick at this and see if you can get it to come up, or do you think you could?
We'll play with it.
Val tried, I tried. I can shut it down if that.
Reboot it.
I'll maybe try.
Not projecting this.
Yeah, but it's fine on my screen. Everything's fine. Like on your phone, press the reverse button and
Just while they're working on that, then I just want to say to council, I'm doing a few budgets in my lifetime. It is good to keep the budget tight, but as we're going through this budget, you're gonna see where there was overspending in a few locations in 2018 and 2017. I myself compared 2017 to 2019 budget to see what's happening. Like quite often I'd see a shift of $10,000 or $20,000, which to me wasn't explainable. But you want to be careful that you don't cut everything in 2019 and then have a shortage. It is always preferred to have a little over, knowing that we have a very difficult budget to work with. But at the same time, you don't want to end up having to do things in 2019 to put them into your 2020 budget because we weren't prepared for it. So as we go and everybody wants to cut and everybody wants to cut, and you've heard this, me say this before, cut yourself to death. Be careful you don't cut yourself into a corner. Okay?
so then I have to move.
Well, if they're still working on that, I'll give you an example.
The difference is, yeah.
If we go to page, say 52. Just let me know when you're ready, Don. I'm just filling the.
Yep, we're ready right behind you. You go ahead.
If you're on page 52, I marked here that we had the actuals in 2017 for salaries. On expenditures on the top line there, you'll see in 2017, the actuals were, I can hardly read it now, 1886. And only 2 years later, you're up to $9,000. That's a lot of change. And I'm sure there's an answer, but the staff will give us the answer. So those are the kind of things you want to watch out for. That's quite a bit of change in 2 years, and I've seen it repeated several times. Having said that, doing a lot of budgets in my life, the staff usually explains it to you, and it usually makes sense. But do not be afraid to ask. Donna, back in your part.
Thank you. Okay, so then we're going to move over to the administration budget. So one of the changes I wanted to point out from last year was that we conducted a pay equity and market study. And so you would have seen that pay equity and market study cost down in the bottom part in 2018 under studies. So it was expected to be about a $40,000 cost. And so that was a one-time thing. So you don't see that, of course, in the 2019 budget. And I'm not sure, I'm not going to go into what that study all came out with, but if at some point we do want to have that discussion, we certainly can. So that was why you don't see, that was the bulk of the revenue from on the revenue side. And then we expect with the theater going and undergoing renovations upstairs to get about $1,000 in admissions and rentals upstairs. So that's the only revenue that we have in administration. So once we move into the salaries and wages, so the wages are up, and the wages include the 7 administration staff in this office, and that includes the clerk position, which is yet to be filled. That position, though, was there when Richard was here, so it's not as if it's not a position that was in existence before. It was still there. So we have applicable grid movements and the 2% COLA. But one of the changes, one of the biggest changes is that the deputy treasurer used to do 50% of her salary used to go to the water billing. She looked after all the water billing and such. And so we've transitioned that over to public works. So although her salary stays the same, we're now, instead of splitting it 50 to administration and 50 to water and sewer, it's now 75 on the administration budget, which is a harder hit to taxes, and less on to water and sewer, which is user pay, but that more accurately reflects what is happening. So that's why that the biggest part of that increase in those, but in that wages as well. So then we have benefits and moving down to meeting allowance, subscriptions and memberships, travel, training and workshops, health and safety, advertising and promotion, postage and courier, phone, fax, internet. We lease the copiers, insurance, which, as I said, I just got those numbers, so we can do some adjusting there. Legal and accounting. So there was quite a big change there, and it dropped, which is good. In 2018, we were aware that there was going to be a number of significant legal issues with the municipality, and so then we had to budget for a lot more legal. We were able to drop that back down for 2019, anticipating that it's not going to be as much. So just to let you know what the split there is, though, is our audit was out for tender 5 years ago, and so we pay our audit $16,800 of that $37,200, and so then we're still looking for legal at $20,400. And as I was saying, the audit has to go back out for tender this year. The other one I want to bring to your attention is insurance deductible expense. So I have your insurance provider coming in on February the 4th to give you an overview of your new insurance package and to explain to you all about municipal insurance. But a few years ago, we increased our deductible up to $10,000. So throughout the years, we have a number of small incidents that costs less than $10,000, so they don't go through insurance, but we end up paying for them. So there could be some, problems with the snowplow hitting a car or a tree branch falling down. There's any number of things. So what I do last year, touch wood, we didn't have too many of those items. So what I do at the end of the year as part of my transfers to reserve, I will bring you that in a report, and I have built up an insurance reserve so that if we come to a year where we have a whole lot of those, then we have some extra money and it won't affect taxes that year. So that's part of that. Our tax write-offs and refunds. So this was an area I had to increase over last year. So we are required to have a program called a vacancy rebate program. It covers commercial and industrial properties, and if they meet their criteria for being vacant a certain number of days and what they're doing to promote their building, they can receive a 30% rebate on their taxes. And as I said, we're mandated to have that program, but we are phasing it out. So 2018 was the full program. There's going to be a 10% reduction in 1920, and then it'll be fully phased out by 2021. Also, we're required to have a charitable rebate program. Again, you have to meet criteria to do that. And we have the Blythe and Wingham Legion taxes. We have a bylaw whereby those taxes are written off, so that those amounts come under this area as well. And the final area in there is we collect the taxes off of the A2A property, but as part of that tax compensation agreement, we have to pay Morris Turnberry the portion of the taxes that they would have received had the land stayed within the Morris Turnberry boundary. So we still get to keep some of it because our taxes are higher than theirs, but we do have to, that's where we pay that amount back over to them. And I think last year it was somewhere around $11,000. So that's what makes up that amount. Tax collection, sometimes we have to send properties into, we have a company that runs our tax sales, so there's fees involved, but we do collect that back from the owner. Bank fees, service awards are for employees. We have a list in our HR policy that says what denomination of a gift they get for every 10 years worth of service. So there's that. The elections expense, of course, we don't have the election in 2019, but rather than have the whole hit in 1 year, we're going to start putting $5,000 away so that by the time the 4 years comes around again, we'll have the most of the money put away for the election. Rental properties expense, so we do rent out a number of properties, as I was saying, and one of those is Hutton Heights, and because it's farmed, we end up having to pay, it's not exempt, so we pay a little bit of taxes in that. Materials and supplies, that covers all our office supplies, printing, toner, filing supplies. We replace one computer per year. And the increase, why we increase that is related to two items. One is for the license for HR Downloads, which is a new program that we have to assist us with HR issues, and Commvault, which is our computer backup system. So those were two new items under that category. Miscellaneous expense was for, we moved that out of council budget into the administration budget, and it has stayed the same, and it's for things like when someone passes away and we have to send a donation and that sort of thing. Inspections and contracts, we're seeing quite an increase here, and I just wanted to go over that. So that is relating to three new contracts. So we still have Carrie Ann under contract for a few months this year. I'm not sure what arrangements we've made there. We are now under contract with Continuit for our computer services. If you remember, that used to be part of a staff person's job, but when the person left, we now have a whole separate contract to deal with that. And then we have $5,000 in there for the Integrity Commissioner and Closed Meeting Investigator, $5,000. We hopefully don't have to use that, but we have it in there in case we do. And so then the last couple of things under the administration is HR recruitment. As same as last year, we don't have an HR person on staff. And so there's a number of opportunities in the year where we need to access outside advice. And so that is a budget for that. And asset management, we have a number, every year we have our asset management software and any improvements we can make to our asset management program. And so we have $10,000 to work with there.
Donna, can I just back up
Yeah.
to the pay equity marketing review impact?
Yeah.
You've got $70,000 here in yellow, but I don't see where it's gone to actuals.
So I'll just explain that. So as we worked through the pay equity market study, we had all anticipating that study, but included in our budget what we thought the impacts would be to get us started for our 2017 budget. But when it came down to finding out the final numbers, there was about $70,000 more that we needed to implement the study as the consultant had recommended. So, and that was very, very last minute in May when we got that information. So we knew it was going to cost an additional $70,000 to implement it. So I showed it here in the administration budget so that it was clear, but throughout the year, what I actually then had to do was take and divide that out into which departments were actually affected by it. So again, it's a one-time thing, and it was spread out over the departments most affected by that study.
But it's in the wages, not in that line item.
Right, so it's moved out of that 70,000, that's why you don't see anything beside it. And it's moved into the appropriate department wages for the same total wages and benefits. So is there any other questions on administration? Chris?
How often is pay equity, the study required?
Dwayne could probably give you a better.
Too many times. Sorry.
Generally 4 to 5 years, you do a comprehensive review, but during in the interim, you on an annual basis you compare yourself to your what we call comparators, the other municipalities. So you maintain your system, you maintain your pay equity system for about 4 to 5 years. You do a thorough review with every 4 to 5 years.
Okay, well, with wages going, if it says wages should go up 2 or 2.2% every year, that almost tells me that should be the baseline, the standard.
Through your read, just as far as, so in terms of, there's 2 ways in terms of maintaining your pay equity system. One is through your CPI, your Consumer Price Index, and that fluctuates in terms of this year, based on the policy. Don is indicating 2.2. In years past, it could be 1.5, it could be 1.8. And then the other component to that again is how other municipalities, in terms of what their what adjustments they've done, because you want to make sure that you're competitive in the labor market. So if other municipalities all of a sudden really ramped up in terms of their salaries and their wages for various positions, if you want to remain competitive, you'd have to do likewise. So you have to watch what other municipalities are doing, but you also have to look at your CPI, your Consumer Price Index.
All right.
I'm just backing up the 2 lines to the item 6330, the inspections and contracts again. On 2 previous budgets, they've been budgeted at $1,500.
Yeah.
And they've consistently came in at over 20,000 the next 2 years, 2018 this year. And this year we're projecting to double that amount again.
Right.
Were they just
So
grossly unbudgeted the first 2 years? Like what, in 2017 and 2018? This doesn't seem to be a concern to the budget, but it's gone up 5-6 fold or more than that, $1,500 to 40,000. That's almost like another total employee.
Right, so for 2019, there are 3 new items, which is what we were talking about, that were not in as part of the items for either of the previous years, because these are brand new. So the 3 new items to add up to the 41,900 in 2019 are the continuate contract for our computer services, which we never had before. We didn't have that last year, and it wasn't in that contract number last year. So it's brand new, and it's about $28,000 to $30,000. And then we have the new contract for the Integrity Commissioner closed meeting person at $5,000. And then we still have Carrie Ann for a few months under contract. So that makes up that 41,000. So there are 3 completely new things that weren't in those previous years.
What did they use for the computer contract before that?
So before that, then we had our clerk, Richard Al, who we had his job description. He had an amazing background in computers. So he was the clerk and our computer person. So when he left, to find those 2 skills married together in the same person again, we're going to be.
This is actually an IT position then.
This is an IT contract. Yeah, IT contract for sure. But does that answer?
No.
Sorry, Trevor, you were going to say something?
Yeah, so really the issue is that, full-time staff complement actually went down because of that position. It's been unfilled for 6-7 months. Carrie Ann has filled in on that contract position, but then we've also, in order to get the IT position, we've had to contract that out because we couldn't find an individual that has both clerk experience and IT experience. But ultimately, the real issue from a salaries perspective is the impact of pay equity, and the pay equity impact is significant, and it's significant, and it will continue to be significant because of how we're comparable in the marketplace. The market determines pay equity, but it also depends on male and female in the same jobs, job descriptions, all that stuff needs to be maintained and ensure that it is maintained to ensure that we're on side with pay equity. There's a significant cost to the municipality if we fall out of pay equity in line. There's probably numbers in the neighborhoods of hundreds of thousands of dollars that we could be at risk if we fall out of pay equity alignment. So that's why the comprehensive part was done last year, because I think there was a few instances we thought we were out offside and we did find out that we were offside. So we made those adjustments and hopefully going forward, the maintaining of the pay equity is a lot better than having to do a $30,000 or $40,000 comprehensive review every 5 years.
So we're going to go with Marty next and then Kirk. So Marty, do you want to come over here so you can see the screen, or do you want to just talk from there?
I've got it right in front of me.
Okay, go ahead.
So, under the revenue part for the fire budget, and keep in mind, this is under,
Page 13 of your purple book.
keep in mind, we're under the new agreement now, and there were changes to how it was previously calculated. It's done by the weighted assessment now, and then each municipality pays for their own fire calls. So that reduced the revenue from other municipalities, and then you can see down below the $80,000 is the fire call recoverable, which also includes the North Huron portion. And that's budgeted in the expense part as well. I'll review that when we get there. The revenue fire marquee recoverable, we had budgeted $15,000. It's showing nothing right now. We did submit, when I arrived, we worked on that, and we submitted 11 claims last fall, and we haven't heard anything back on them yet. So there's a possibility of that money still coming in.
So on that, Mark, can you just refresh my memory? We give them $5,000 a year as a retainer fee or something? No retainer fee,
No.
just simply go after it?
It's, they get a percentage of
Okay.
whatever is
Just a
brought
percentage.
in, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And that's why you've dropped that down to 5,000, because you're not getting,
Well, it's so uncertain right now.
yeah.
But
Okay.
that 5,000 could be higher.
Yeah, okay.
And what we talked about with that is that would go into
Reserve.
kind of a reserve for if we have more fire calls than we budgeted for.
Yeah. Stay with the fire department, you're saying.
So that's the revenue. Under expenditures, the salaries, the full-time salaries, that will show under the contracts, inspections contracts. So that's the fire chief salary and all the fire chief expenses. So it's not just salary, it's also the expenses. Part-time salaries and part-time, then the wages, the part-time fire calls is shown in there, 90,000 and 80,000. Moving down to the clothing, uniform, bunker gear, we need to replace an extra 4 sets of gear this year. And we're looking at about $2,500 per set. So we had to increase that by approximately $10,000. I'll just highlight the obvious ones here. The training travel workshop, that actual for 2018 is not an accurate figure. There's still some to come out of that. So that's why it's a little low there. And in 2018, we budgeted a little more because we had to do the first responder research for all the firefighters. I've kind of increased it a little bit from 2017. The last couple of years with the uncertainty of the ESTC Center and the changeover in the fire services to the NFPA standards, we got to get back onto the regimen of getting our new people doing the training. We haven't sent away anybody lately, so that's where that increase comes from. Everything else going down to Materials, supplies. Again, that's not a final actual number there. But I do expect it to be, I budgeted 15,000. We do need to replace a couple computers within the fire department. We are using some very old hand-me-downs, I believe. So that's where some of that money will be spent. The transfer to reserves, you will notice that it went from 122,000 down to 100,000. And that was part of the agreement that we reduced the transfer to reserves. Again, the inspection contracts is increased due to, that's the fire chief's salary and expenses. Equipment, repair, maintenance, and I also have purchases in my sheet, so it's equipment, purchases, repair, and maintenance. We increased that because we're going to start to replace our SCBA units, and I have a couple SCBA units in there to be purchased. They are approximately $85,000 to $9,000 a piece. Oh, sorry. SCBA, that's your self-contained breathing apparatus. Everything else there seems in line. Going on to the Wingham Fire Hall, not a whole lot of changes with that. Pretty much everything was just carried over from the previous year. Same with, well, the Blythe Fire Hall. You'll notice the inspection contracts is $42,000, and that is the rent for the fire hall for the year to our new owners.
Trevor, did you have a question?
Yes, through you, Reeve. Correct, I'm just trying to understand, like, I know outside of municipal government, items like SPCA and items like the whole uniform, because they're usually about a 15, is it 10 to 15 year life in those things? 10-year life. Why would he be considering those as an expenses and not capital? And that's maybe not a question for Marty, but maybe it's a question for Donna. I'm just not sure why. I don't think it matters from a perspective of taxation, but it's not clear to me why we would treat those things as not capital.
So things like the bunker gear and the SCBA, those are items that we use every day at every call, every training. And we put it in the general operating budget because of the shared agreements that we have. Whereas if you put it in the capital, yes, they pay for that as well, but then you're going to use up pretty much your whole capital when you have to replace everything all at once. So our idea is to purchase so many items, not all at once, but stagger them every year.
Yeah, it's just I think you could stagger them in capital as well. It's a conversation of it. If they're paying them in operating or paying them in capital, it only matters. It's just philosophically in my head, I'm thinking everything else we talk about that's $9,000 or $10,000 and that kind of thing, we would capitalize it. We just don't hear. And it's not right or wrong. I think I just wanted an idea, and I think I got that answer, so that's fine.
Kevin?
Through you, do you know how many currently you have, many staff or firefighter staff that you have that are requiring to complete the certification in either the old?
Not offhand. I know they did. Well, when the STC was still up and running, they did 4 or 5 at that time. So I believe there might be less than 5 that are required, that don't have that certification.
Both the recruits are all up to speed?
Christopher?
I was just wondering,
Oh, sorry.
to, just so council has know what the costing is of not having the ESTC center under our administration. Would you agree that it's about $7,000 per firefighter to train them to an FPA?
Maybe a little less, but yeah, it's, to do firefighter 1 and firefighter 2, you're looking at, well, firefighter 1 is it's a 15-day course. And they segment it into 3 different parts, part A, part B, part C. Each part is a 5-day course. So it, $1,500 just in registration fees if you send them to a regional training center, and then whatever you pay them for their time being away and things like that on top of that. So,
My question would be then, in the budget, is that training in the budget for that increase that we now have that we can't, that the North Huron is not allowed to, or not being able to recuperate in their own cost?
Through you, Rafe, already, is there a value to the, with the old equipment? It costs about $8,000 to replace it, the breathing, is the old equipment, reworked or just pitched?
So some of the bunker gear, they can keep for training purposes only. Within the fire service, everything has to be certified. And if something happens and they don't have a certified piece of equipment, that gets us in big trouble. So that's why we have to keep that up. So what I say is with the suits, we do keep them back in case we need them for spares, for training purposes and other things. As far as the SCBA units and things like that, no,
It's too bad.
I see on here the utilities, or we don't have any utilities for 2019 to speak of. Is that part of the lease agreement we made? Okay. Oh, go ahead, Anita, sorry.
For the rents for the fire hall, it says here 42,000. Does that include the storage you have at the north end of Blythe too, or no?
the part of the what?
The storage, my understanding is there's a lot of equipment stored at the old fire hall.
No, we don't have any other equipment.
Okay, this is everything, there's nothing else included. Okay, and for item number 6330, inspections contracts, can you explain it to me again? You said it's your contract or you, yeah?
Yeah, so what
Is
that
that
is,
what the municipality has to pay, and there's still some other portion coming from Morstonbury and Huron East for you? Is that what
Right.
it, yeah?
correct. So that includes my salary and
Yeah.
all the fire chief expenses.
Okay,
So mileage,
Yeah.
office, everything included within my
for
basic.
not sure.
Yeah.
Okay,
And then that's split between Huron East and North Huron.
thank you.
Okay, that pretty much has the
Yeah, that's good,
fire
Marty.
portion covered.
Flip over to the FPO of North Huron and Peace. I can copy of that too.
Okay, so again, with the FPO, that's the fire prevention officer. Previously to our agreement with Huron East, you had a fire prevention officer 1 day a week. When we made the agreement with Huron East, we bumped him up to 2 days a week, and he covers Huron East for that other day. Huron East, Morris, Turnberry are together. So therefore, that's where the money, the revenue, other municipalities. So that'll be the portion you receive from Huron East for his services. And then under wages and the expenditures, I don't know why it was only budgeted for $6,000 in 2018, because That was definitely under budgeted at that time. Even if he remained 1 day a week, it would have been over that $6,000. So that's the increase in the wages for him and the benefits. And then everything else, basically, we just rolled over from last year to this year. Our travel might be a little bit light, but we'll have to keep an eye on that because he does do a little bit more traveling. But when he travels to here in East, that's a recoverable cost for you guys.
But, Artie, what's the $50,000 for fire calls in the yellow? It doesn't appear only 2019 budget.
Yes, okay, so that's North Huron's portion of our fire calls that we pay into as part of the agreement.
Okay.
So that would be, that's North Huron only portion of fire calls. It was included in part-time salaries last year.
So this is just for the CPO or FPO?
No, that's for the fire calls. We had to put it in this part of the budget because that's an expenditure that's not shared between the other municipalities.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so that's why it shows here.
So just help me out one little bit more of that. So that money is our fire trucks going somewhere doing something or somebody helping us?
That's our fire trucks responding to incidents in North Huron only.
Okay.
Okay.
Right, Kevin?
So, through your, the fire prevention officer, he also does the infractions as well. Fire infractions, if someone's not complying with the fire code,
He writes orders. Yes,
has there ever been an order written?
he writes orders almost every time he goes out.
Has there been any recovery of the costs to the fines of non-being compliant?
He hasn't written any fines. So what he does is he goes out and whenever there's a fire code violation, he will write an order up. They comply with that order. And in most cases around here, people comply. So then he'll do a follow-up inspection to make sure that they're compliant. Okay. So we haven't written any fines, so to say. If they fail to comply with an order, then it goes to provincial court.
So Marty, you had said that fire call that's North Huron only was included in part-time salaries in previous years? Is that where it would normally have shown up in actuals?
So that, yeah. So that 169, is that right, Donna? How did we do that?
The way that I understand it is it's kind of taken the revenue back to like the old board system where everybody is now paying, you pay so much on assessment and then so much for your fire calls. So then what the guys have to do is track under part-time wages how much for a fire call for each of the responding area. And then we're gonna get a bill for that. So the new board system is going to have this new revenue of $80,000 in calls. Marty was anticipating 65,000 from North Huron. What were the other two paying?
No, it was 50,000 from.
50,000 from us.
It's 20,000 from Central Huron and 10
10.
from Worcester.
Yeah.
No, 10 from Central Huron, 20 from Worcester.
I guess my question is that if the actual, no matter how you look at where the money's coming from, the operating shell is the same. So the number of part-time employees is the same.
That's right.
If I look at the part-time employee budget in 18, it's about 170,000. So I look at 170,000 and then all of a sudden I flip in here and there's another 50,000. There's 220, there's an extra 50,000 somewhere along the line that I don't think we need.
No. So the salaries were 170,000 and there's still 170,000.
No, there isn't.
Okay, look on the, under the wages.
Yeah.
So what Marty wanted is a new category, and the 170,000 is divided into 90,000 and 80,000.
So what's the 50,000 in 2019 and NH only?
Right. So the wages are the same. Do you see that? There's still $170,000. So the wage part of it is the same.
Okay.
So what is different then is the revenue side. So on the revenue side, you used to see how much that the partners would pay would be $315,000, right? Now you see they only pay $277,000. And the difference is $80,000 in fire calls that's coming from us, Morris Turnberry, and Central Huron. So really what we're doing is they're paying less under the agreement and then making it up in fire calls. And we also have to pay for our share of the fire calls. So it's basically like the old board system was.
But what I'm seeing is I think we need to look at it again. Only reason I'm saying is that
I see where you're coming from.
because if it has to do with revenue, then that $50,000 that 50,000 that's in North Huron only should somehow been impacted, because I see the 80,000 on the fire budget. There's 80,000 that offsets the 80,000 that you've taken out of the 170. But if it's the same number of people, why does that fire call 50,000 plus the wages be 220,000 and we still have the same amount of people? If that 50,000 in the North Huron only is to pay for basically wages of part-time people for North Huron fire calls, then your budget for salaries and benefits for part-time people are $220,000.
So it's
Not 170.
It's showing twice somewhere. Yeah. I see where he's coming from on that.
We'll do up a chart, and I think maybe the chart that you had would be, I think it's explained a lot easier there. So you can see it.
Well, we'll have to
Take a look.
Through you, Reeve, just for clarity, just from my own past experiences, we got the wages for the fire department down here as part-time.
Mhm.
Can you describe to me what a part-time employee is?
Well, they're not on our full-time salary, like, so they're the volunteers.
Yeah, that's, I'm getting my point, yeah, that, because part-time would be included in the process of the municipality.
Well, these fellas work for the municipality and get a T4 from the municipality for their part-time wages.
You're saying they work for the municipality?
Yep, we give them a T4.
All right, I beg to disagree, but that's.
What do you think? Like, they
Well,
are
just like,
volunteers,
shouldn't-
but they get
well,
a
I don't think they should be
T4.
down as part of the T4, yeah, so, I'm getting off topic, and I shouldn't go. If they're injured, they go on WSIB and covered through workers' compensation, are they allowed to reintegrate into the system?
I don't know what the situation is, but we pay their WSIB.
And this municipality also claims that they are not employees of so we have no reason to rehabilitate or reason to reintegrate them into anything. They're just out in the middle of nowhere. So all I'm getting at is that we should reword that from part-time to volunteer, because they are not part-time, not the way this municipality treats them.
I think if you look under the employment standards, because they get a T4, they're classed as a part-time employee.
So the municipality would have to reintegrate them into somewhere in the system?
You mean if they were hurt?
Yeah.
I would think if you're getting a T4, you'd be covered under our insurance too, would you
See,
not?
what you're going at there with the full-time to the part-time, I believe you still would have.
gone through that process, and no, it's not, so
No.
that's what I'm getting at, they're not in this municipality anywhere near part-time worker, they are a volunteer.
So maybe the chief can follow up on that and just see what's going on, because if somebody did get hurt on a fire call, I don't think I'd want to find out later we're not taking care of them.
What was it?
Well, we do, they're under our WSIB and the municipality has to pay the claims, so.
Do we have an example of someone hurt? Anyone else?
No, I just say,
But
that's
if
why,
you think the wording is.
just the wording, it's just the word, yeah,
Yeah,
they're
I
not
mean, we can change the wording if that's something that.
gone through several tens of thousands of dollars to figure that one out, so, yeah, no, this municipality doesn't consider the fire department part-time worker. They're paid an honorarium, they're not an employee, they don't have to, they don't have to find them light duty, they don't have to put them into some other, they don't have to conform or consider their disability when rehiring them back into the workforce because they're not the employee. They have their own employees, and their own employer doesn't cover them because they're not hurt
That's
during
right.
their work.
Well, that's an interesting one to look into, just because
So
that's,
it was just that don't call them part-time and okay, if they're not,
yeah,
you get the wrong idea. So.
That they still, so in your case, what you're saying is, they can't, if they can't do the work that's provided, that they were doing prior to an injury.
Mhm.
I think the obligation is still there that they find similar work. Yeah, because I am going through that in here in East right now. But if there isn't that, because most municipalities don't have, like, it's not a standard job, let's say. So there really isn't anything comparable. So then the municipality will have to retrain that person for another career.
but you've already been through that, it didn't work that way.
This municipality would automatically have 42 more employees.
Interesting.
If you were injured doing fire service, if you sprained your knee and you couldn't climb a ladder and you work, your employer is going to cover you, and he doesn't have to hire you back. And the municipality is going to give you grass cutting fees on the fees around the public works.
I don't know who would look into that, but somebody should be looking into that, but we're gonna just kind of move it
Yeah,
along here.
I'm getting way
But
off
that's
topic.
very interesting to know that.
I just was wanting the wording
Trev,
changed.
yep, no, understandable.
No, I'm just going, we need to carry
Yeah,
on.
yeah, I got way off from my own person.
Okay, is there any more questions for Marty on the FPO budget then? Seeing none?
Seeing none?
Okay, Marty, thank you. So we'll just quickly move over to page 15, the EST. So there's nothing on there at this time. There will be some expenses go in and out. So say, for example, we have our insurance premium. So we're gonna have to pay it and then get a refund after today when we could show that we sold it. So there's gonna be some things we're gonna have to sort out as we move forward. Page 16, I'd like to go past the police budget if I could for tonight. And what we would like to do is to move on to, I'm gonna quickly do the Maitland Valley Conservation budget on page 17. So we get a levy from Maitland Valley Conservation. And so actually they gave me I didn't have the budget when I put this together. And actually, so I increased it by 1.55%. Actually, now I have the number, they've increased it to 2%. So I have to make a few $100 adjustment on the next budget that we look at.
So, yeah, I guess the question I have is, just more maybe for information for the current council, that was passed on to us, or passed on the previous council. So the Maitland Valley Conservation Levy is relating to all the costs associated with Maitland Valley. However, there's capital costs associated to Maitland Valley that they're like roads and like bridges and that type of stuff that they've changed their model on how they're funding those things within Maitland Valley. Correct me if I'm wrong, so I'm going on memory here. Is that if the infrastructure is in the municipality that, if it's in North Huron is responsible to pay for those costs associated that aren't covered by Maitland Valley, in Maitland Valley's levy. If it's in the watershed, not in North Huron is not responsible as part of their levy to cover the cost of repairs and major improvements to infrastructure that is not within the boundaries of North Huron. That was not the norm prior to last year. They would give you the whole budget and they would split it up based on the levy, and you would be accounted for that part of the levy. So they changed. I think we just want to make sure we get that information again. Maybe the information that came from Maitland Valley just before the council changed, just for information as how the levy is costed and what North Huron is responsible for from regards to operations, but what they're responsible for from a capital perspective as it relates to the Maitland Valley watershed.
But definitely we have to have somebody come and talk to us, because they're not just gonna come in here and tell us we need $75,000 for a guppy on the river. I wouldn't think. Oh, you'll set that up?
Oh, and who is appointed here to Maitland Valley? Anita is.
You get that one too. Enjoy, Anita.
So would that be you, Dwayne, to ask you to come and speak to us, or would that?
Well, first of all, I mean, there was a letter that was provided to the previous council, so we'll pull that letter, we'll bring it forward. I have a slightly different understanding than Deputy Roosite, but that being the case, I don't think we'll get into the discussion.
No, I'm going on
until we
memories.
pull that letter again.
I'm good with
But,
that.
yeah, but I certainly don't have a problem in terms of following up with Maitland Valley, or whether or not you wish to use that as an opportunity to, it's up.
Yeah, I can do that.
Want to do that?
Okay, thank you. So then we're gonna move on to Kirk and the building department. So Kirk, are you okay there, or do you want to move here?
If you can't hear me, just let me know.
Okay, thank you, Kirk.
Just a little bit of quick history on the building department for council. In 2016, we entered into the shared service pilot project. I was brought on board as a building official in August of 2016. At that time, North Huron employed one building inspector. Morris Turnberry employed one building inspector. Myself, building official. We also had 20% of an office assistant here in North Huron that helped with the building department. As we moved forward, we lost that assistant and we lost the building inspector for North Huron, and that individual was replaced. At the direction of council, late in 2018, we were going down to a two-person department for the 2019 year. North Huron at that time, then early this year, early 2018 lost the building inspector. So we're down to two individuals. So solely Morris Turnberry employees in the building department providing that service to North Huron. No office assistant. In the prior budgets, it was a lengthy process for the budget purpose, because we had to take the North Huron employee, and if that employee was doing the building inspections in Morris Turnberry was paying North Huron for that employee's time when they were doing that, and it was vice versa from Morris Turnberry and North Huron. Council follows me. Okay. So we have a new agreement. That new agreement was passed March of this year, the shared service agreement, and it's in place for 5 years until 2020. In that agreement, 40% of my cost with benefits is paid by North Huron. 60% of my salary with benefits is paid by Morris Turnberry. All other costs are split 50-50. Hard costs as well as the cost of the building inspector. That's split 50/50. And that will bring us up to where we can go through some numbers. Yep. So for the 2019 proposed budget, revenue side, we're looking at $70,000. The 18,500, that is drainage superintendent services. I do provide that service to both municipalities. The 18,500, 9250 will be coming from taxation, and 9250 will come from OMAFRA. OMAFRA pays 50% grant on the drainage superintendent. And then I've also included $4,000 for zoning certificates. That's certificates that we will issue on property transactions, sales, and or purchases for the township. So total revenue, quickly, 92.5. Moving down into expenses, you'll notice that there are no salaries or benefits listed. That's because North Huron does not have a building inspector employed. I've included a clothing allowance of $450, subscription and memberships, $900. Quickly, just to let you know what's in there, that's the Ontario Building Officials Membership ×2, Ontario Plumbing Inspectors Association, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Canadian Farm Builders Association, and also the Blue Water Chapter, which is a network of building officials where we get together on a monthly basis with, it's comprised of 6 counties in this area. And keep in mind, these costs and the expenditures are split 50/50 with Morris Turnberry as well. This is your share though. Morris Turnberry has the same share. $5,000 training, travel, and workshop. CPR, first aid, fire protection course, exams with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, mandatory training with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, training with the Ontario Building Officials Association to maintain accreditation. And there is the annual training and meeting conference with the Ontario Building Officials Association. $300 for advertising. That certainly is light based on the costs that we've just had to pay out due to the advertising in 2 newspapers and the building officials website for an employee. That could be increased, but hopefully we do not have to advertise anymore. Office supplies, $1,000. Phone, fax, and the internet, $1,500. That is cell phone plans for 2 individuals. I have put in $5,000 for legal, which is an increase over last year. $850 for, that money there is allocated for building code amendment subscriptions. So we have to pay the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing yearly for building code amendment subscription and updates. And also in there is a little set aside for training manuals that we have to purchase for training purposes. The next one is a significant number. That there is 40% of myself, 50% of the building inspector, and also included in that is 25% for an assistant. Right now, we don't have that. I'm getting some complaints with respect to calling the office and getting voicemail all the time. And I'd like to kind of step up the building department and have somebody there to answer that call. They got to get a hold of us when we're on the road and we're not in the office, and we can get the answer back to the individuals right away. This position is not filled yet. It's in the budget. 50% will be paid by the drainage department out of Morris Turnberry. 25% will be paid by the building department of Morris Turnberry, and 25% by by North Huron for building purpose. Equipment repair and maintenance, that's for the building department vehicle in Morris Turnberry. $3,500, that is for fuel, that's for the building department car and also my truck. I use my personal vehicle for building service in both municipalities. $1,100 for computer software and $3,950. That is for office rent and utilities. We went and we looked at the total square footage of the space that we use out of the Morris Turnberry office for offices for the building department, as well as the hallways and the washrooms. And it came in at 17%. So that's what's in that cost. And if we had to rent an office somewhere to provide the service to both municipalities, it was based on $500 a month rent. So again, Morris Turnberry is paying the same cost as what you see.
Okay. Any questions on the building part? Okay, we'll flip over to page 19, property standards.
Okay, as council is aware, we do have an individual on contract providing property standards services and bylaw enforcement services to both municipalities. The contract is for no less than 6 hours per week. I looked at the amount of complaints that came in so far with Bruce Brocklebank on contract, and he worked on 34 complaints, and there's still some that are outstanding. I will say a lot of them are about barking dogs and untidy yards. So that would be the two main types of complaints that he does work on. There's not a lot in the budget, $300 for advertising, some for phone, office supplies. Legal, we put in $5,000 and then $8,000 for Bruce Brocklebank to provide that service. Yearly budget proposed $14,300.
Any questions?
Through you, Reeve. Fines, I'm not seeing an item for that, so is it substantial or?
Bruce has not written one fine yet. For revenue purposes?
Yes.
No, not one fine is written yet. We do have to amend the fees and charges bylaw, because in our property standards bylaw, we can charge certain items, but there's one item that we can't. That will be caught in the new fees and charges bylaw when we update it. But so far, fines have not been laid. We do have kept track of 3 files where fines could be recouped on that, but we haven't done that yet.
Any other questions? Seeing none?
So we can move on to page 20, the animal control budget. So the animal control budget has stayed basically the same. We do very well issuing the licenses and permits, and then we charge them a $50 administration fee for if the dogs are loose, and then plus under there, we charge them a fee for having paying your dog tag late. Also, we budget for livestock claim grants and livestock claim expenses. So for the farmers in the crowd, you'll know what those are about. And then under expenditures, then we put in with animals, you could always have some sort of legal problems. The materials and supplies buys the actual tags and papers and things we need to go to sell the tags. We throw in a couple $100 for inspections and contracts, The animal control officer, when we call him, we budget for $1,000 for that, and then the livestock claim. So the livestock claim, we would pay the person if it went through all the process. We could pay the claimant $1,500, and then we could get a grant. We'd have to submit that and then try to get a grant back on that. So that's why it's an in and out, not the same amount, but that's what livestock claims are about. So what we want to do for 2019, again, time has run out on us, but as you can see, then the department will have generated some extra dollars. So what we're hoping to do as part of that transfer to reserve list that I bring you is to put what money we can here away. And then we feel it's really important in 2020 to hire a physical person to go out and actually do the dog counting. That hasn't been done for about 10 years, I'm gonna say. So that's a project that we've been wanting to do, so we could use a little bit of the money left over from this year and then add to it next year. Okay, does that make sense?
Go ahead, Chris.
Through you, Reeve, I've got a big word, profit. Wow, budget with a profit.
You'll see a couple more.
Oh, that's good.
Okay, so now we're going to, I'm not sure, Marty, did you ever cover emergency planning? Did you ever do that one?
For here?
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll just speak to it. It's very, very minimal, page 21. So the only things in there are, I'm not sure if you council has been made aware that you'll have to sit in on an emergency exercise. I think that they did it with the old council just before you guys started. So that's the bulk of the cost. There'll be some sort of a tabletop exercise that you'll have to come to. You won't be given a lot of details. It could be a tornado, a snowstorm, or whatever, and then you're gonna have to see how our emergency plans that we have in place, what your role is and what you would have to do to get us through that emergency. So we need.
Is that the one that goes with the entire county, or is that just one on our own?
Yeah,
It's the county one?
County now.
Okay,
yeah, David Clark.
yeah, so they'll probably be setting the timing up for that. Not, I'm gonna presume.
Oh, sorry,
They'll be
emergency
setting the
exercise?
timing up.
You still do your own exercise,
Oh, do we?
but yes,
He comes and
everybody does their own.
Okay, and it's just coordinated to make, okay. Yeah, go ahead, Trev.
Yeah. When the fire chief was here, David Sparling was our CEMC, so that's and then the county's taken that role. So it still would be municipally done, but David Clark would be then responsible for the CEMC. Still taking in considerations public works and all that other stuff about what requirement is needed, but it will be done, and it's usually an exercise sometime done in September or something like that. Usually it's when they usually get around to doing it. It's once a year, so I think 2 years ago was a flood. The year before that was a tornado. There's many different scenarios that they play. Yeah.
Any other questions on that?
all right, so now we're gonna turn it over to Sean and begin the public works section of the budget. So
Sean,
Sean has many
you got
sections.
40 minutes.
Yeah.
And go.
Sean, are you okay there?
Yeah, unless council wants me to move, I've got everything here. So, first, I guess a little bit of preamble. There's a couple of points that I think are very important that we touch on before we dive into it, and then I'll move as quickly as council's comfortable with me doing. I wanted to point out that this is very much a transitional budget, and as such, at face value, when you look at the comparative 17, 18, 19, it at first glance will become very frustrating. I think I can answer some of those questions right off the pin. When I say transitional, basically, in a very, very short period of time, we went from, I think what you would consider to be a very simple and straightforward budget, and that was right up until the end of 2015, where things were really looked at as a whole. Public Works. It was very straightforward. Enter shared services 2016, 2017, and the introduction of a different approach to tracking. And what they basically did is went from a very simple budget to an extremely complex one where they were tracking basically, well, as a simple example, every piece of equipment that the municipality owned was its own account center. So it had wages assigned to it, benefits assigned, fuel, parts, materials. Everything was tracked to the most minute detail, and it was done so right in the GL. So our budget became extraordinarily complex. So for 2018, I had just arrived. I was only here a couple of months. So basically, we did our best to pull it together and carry on in that fashion, understanding that the intention for 2019 was to get that pendulum swinging back and find the happy medium. The whole idea here was to have a budget that would answer the questions of council, that would help staff track without spending resources tracking details that really nobody needed for decision-making or tracking purposes. So what you see in front of you represents that net output. There's been a lot of time internally within the department, a tremendous amount of time between Donna and myself working through this. And as we go, I'm hoping that it becomes somewhat intuitive as we talk through it. One of the things to point out right at the beginning, you're going to see in here references to machinery rentals. For 17 and 18 in the budget in front of you, it's in there. You'll see that it's not there for 19, and there's a very specific reason. These machinery rentals are our own equipment that we rented to ourselves and netted out as a zero. The value to that is to be able to look at a particular cost center and say it costs X dollars to do snow removal in parking lots. The problem is because it's an in-out, it made the budget itself extremely convoluted. So that comes into that whole discussion we had about the tracking software using the Access database that we've developed. So we're still tracking all of that, but we're not doing it in the budget because it's an in-out. So if council comes and says, okay, how much does it cost us for parking lots? What's the public works or the equipment contribution to operating the rec center? We have that data, but it doesn't sit in here where you might, if at face value, you might look at that massive line item, $70,000 for equipment. It artificially inflates the cost of operating the center if you don't look at the thing globally and actually pull that value out. So that's out. Purpose to make this an easier to understand budget. We still have the data. It doesn't live in the general ledger. When we go into salary allocations, I really wanted to point out, now we will have a very small discussion, closed session about a very small component. But generally speaking, you're not looking at a change in overall staffing complement. When you look from one year to the next, you might see it move all over the place. This is based on changes in condition, circumstances within the municipality. Like we may budget a number for snow removal and have a great winter or a bad winter. As we go, I'm going to tighten these numbers up. I took my best shot at it last year, and some areas I overestimated, some under. Net result was the same. And really, we're not in a position where we have a shortfall or a surplus of staff. It's just where we're using it. And if we get into specifics on the salary piece, I can answer it, but that's going to change from year to year based on conditions and circumstances. And now really, just to kind of wrap this up, before I go into the line by line, the whole idea was, as I said, to make this budget more intuitive. So in some areas I've said, why are we tracking costs? I had a miscellaneous fund in facilities as an example. But when I looked at how it was being used, it belonged in administration. So I moved the whole thing to administration and zeroed it out for facilities. The whole idea is that people should be able to look at this budget as we move along and get it, and understand it and say, okay, and even internally, when we get an invoice, it should be very clear as to where that invoice is to be coded. So I've with Donna's help, we've added a couple of accounts for vehicle licensing, for Ontario One Call, things like that, so it becomes very intuitive moving forward. And as we move through this term of council, the expectation and intention is that this whole budget will tighten up and start seeing that year-to-year flow, which will also help us really to better identify areas where we're too high. If we happen to be over budgeting or under budgeting in an area, we'll be able to tighten up and make those changes. Because there's been so much change in the department over the last 5 years, that's a real challenge right now. So anyways, thank you for indulging me on that little preamble. It really will help as we kind of carve into this. So when you look at Public Works budget, there's really not much of a story in the revenue section, other than you'll see that we went from 530,000 last year to 10,000 this year. Again, pulled all that in-out vehicle equipment rental out. So really the only thing that stands out here is in my mind, is the Public Works income of $7,500, and that's really where we're charging out our services. Perfect example is sweeping. The county in the spring and some of the neighboring municipalities will ask us to run our street sweeper over and pick up. We do that sort of thing. If we're asked, we try to help, and we charge back based on our standing billing rate. So then, as we go into this now, you'll see the different headings that we track Public Works in. So the first one is roads paved. Again, unless somebody has questions on the salaries, the salary and benefits is all calculated through this salary tracking process that we go through. The interesting ones, though, in my mind, are the ones that I'd like to point council to, are the materials and supplies and the contracted services. Materials and supplies, $7,632. We're looking at cold patch. That's the hot mix. That's the materials, the physical materials that we would purchase to repair a paved road, through the course of the year, pothole repair and that sort of thing. The contracted services are, as it says, contracts that we have: line painting, crack sealing, asphalt repair and patching, where we've got a bigger repair that will bring a inside service provider in. And that, again, I bumped that up based on what we see as our actual expenditures. We go to roads unpaved. This one's a big one.
Just before we go that far, if you don't mind me asking, so you went on this one here, this machine rentals. You're not going to rent this year at all?
No, that's our internal tracking.
That's what you're doing away with.
It's still we're still doing it. It just hasn't been embedded in the GL, and that's the reason why I don't really want to show, in this case, a $58,000 expenditure in there that's actually zero.
Okay, I understand.
It can be easily misinterpreted. So that number still exists, and if council needs it, we can immediately provide it.
Yeah, but it's just in and out.
It's an in and out. So on to the unpaved, the materials and supplies. That's your. There's three big items in here: the maintenance gravel, calcium chloride, and your miscellaneous materials, specifically stockpiling of aggregate. The first two, the maintenance gravel and calcium chloride, those prices we have nailed down, because what we did last year is we put multi-year tenders out. We did a 2-year for gravel because we knew we were going to do the south last year and the north side this year, and we did calcium chloride for 3 years. So this will be year 2 of 3. Conditional, of course, on budget approval, but we have those numbers. And then the only additional, and the reason you'll see that slight increase is the crew had concerns because we didn't really stockpile much last year for aggregate, A, B, and B gravel in particular. So I added some funds to that to give us an adequate stockpile. Should they do, culvert replacements in the rural and that sort of thing, it calls for aggregate. Some sort of work that they need on the road, they'll have the material to do it. We go to roads, bridges, and culverts.
Nita has a question for you.
Oh, sorry.
Do we still have our own gravel pits?
Yes, we do.
And they are included there, the gravel is used for the roads too?
That's
Or is this a gravel cost or a labor cost?
It's actually labor and transportation. So
Labor and
what
transportation.
they come in, they grade, do all the sorting, grading, and then deliver. Yeah, that number would be substantially higher if we were purchasing the excavators.
Okay, well, because it's under materials and supplies, wouldn't you expect it to be under contract services?
You're absolutely right. It could be captured under contracted services, same as and that's something that Donna can help me correct. It's just historically been
Yeah.
there.
That's
But we can split it out. It's very easy. Okay, so roads, bridges, and culverts. The big ones here again are your materials and supplies and contracted services. Basically, we're looking at, I've got some money budgeted for replacement of culverts. So they do keep sections in stock and we'll rotate them. So as we use them, we purchase more. That way we're never caught without, or theoretically anyways. And then I do have some engineering here, very small amount of engineering, 4,000 for bridges and structures, just in the event that, every second year we have our OSIMs that are regulated. And then if we get into a situation where there's some concerns, I need to make sure I have some engineering money so that I can, and it's not much, we're looking at 4,000 there, but it's just a bit of a buffer, I guess we'll call it. Traffic operations, we go into, this was an interesting one here. The first one, materials, that's very much, and I know people shudder when you say it, but it's miscellaneous materials. So we're looking at seed, we're looking at equipment that might be needed, or replacement parts, parts for the flail mower, that sort of thing. So it's not a tremendous amount of money, but it's we'll definitely consume it in a year. The other piece is, now you'll notice from last year, from the 2018 to this year, I've increased this one. There's a big reason for that. This is, I've got 4 items in here. We've got rental of an excavator, a High Hope, to do some more ditching in the rural to kind of get things opened up and cleaned up. We've got equipment rental, specifically chipper and bucket truck for some of the tree work. The tree piece is huge. What we found is, there's a lot of stuff we can do ourselves, but there's a lot of the bigger stuff where we have to bring contractors in. And that ash borer has hit us very hard. Over the last couple of years, the guys have seen a significant increase in dead and dying trees. These things very quickly become liability. We don't want the branches falling on vehicles, or heaven forbid, residents. So that's been included. And then this will be the 3rd year of the weed control piece. There's giant hogweed in the township. 2017 they hit it. Last year we hit it really hard, and we were able to get some additional funding from the county. This year I've budgeted more because we don't want to let this get ahead of us again. So they're basically continuing to work their way along the riverbanks, and it's getting more difficult to access, but it is there. It's prevalent, and they're trying to knock it down.
I just actually heard about this hogweed down Riverside Park. So you're gonna take care of that this year then? They were saying it was down there. Somebody was telling me it was down there.
It's heavy in EW, but
We'll have a look tomorrow.
if it's there, we'll be on it.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry,
Okay,
Brad, did you
so
wanna say something?
Well, I just that there is an item down, there has been items down in the Riverside Park that look quite like it, but it actually isn't. So there was some stuff checked last year and the year before
Mhm.
that it looks like it, but it wasn't. But it, again, because it follows that process of once it germinates, it goes down the riverbank and then lands on the bank, it's always a possibility. So I think we with that type of stuff, we're always public acknowledgement that if you see something you think it is, that you were to call the county or to call us to make sure that it's nasty stuff if you get into it. So you don't want to get into it that perspective. So.
But just before we move on, I know with the last council, Councillor Bowden had complained about the way the river was kept in Blythe. It used to be cut right down to the river, and we could all see the river. And you and I have had conversations about just exactly what I'm talking about. At one time, you could sit in there and look out in the river. Somehow it looks like we've got to the point where if you have to get off the riding more, nothing's going to happen. That's honestly the way it looks. So is that taken into consideration in this budget this year too? For cleaning that up a little better or getting somebody involved to do it?
That, and we'll have quite a bit more discussion on that soon, but that ties to that whole change in approach to parks.
You got it.
So we'll definitely touch on that a little later.
Yep.
Before 8:30. Okay, yeah, and the one other point to bring out is that the last council they did appoint Stu Moffat as our weed inspector, so he's gone away and had the training and all that kind of thing. So, again, as you said, if somebody sees something, please call in. We have trained personnel that can go and assess. So, and that's new for last year. So, we get into signs and guardrails, and okay, there's been new questions so far, so that's good. As far as signs and guardrails, you'll see there's a $6,100 bit there. That's primarily tied to, you may notice around the township, we're trying to replace poles. We're getting away from the steel ones. We're going to pressure treated, either 4x4 or 6x6, depending on the application. We found that they seem to be very durable and easier to work with. So we've budgeted for some pole replacement. And then also there's a line item in here for sign replacement. What people don't realize is annually our signs are checked using a very specialized piece of equipment for reflectivity. If it doesn't meet MTO standards, it gets replaced. So we budget for replacement signs on an annual basis, and that's all documented.
Sorry, Sean. When you have signs and guardrails and stuff and vegetation creeps on those signs and stuff, is it the responsibility of Public Works or the responsibility of the landowner to ensure that they're not blocking stop signs or whatever the case may be?
The short answer is the way we've approached it. It depends on sight lines. It depends on a bunch of things, but we try to keep all of our signs clear.
Thank you.
And realistically, any sign would be on the road allowance anyway, so it would be our responsibility.
Okay.
Winter control. These are pretty straightforward items. I should speak to overtime. Everybody's favorite topic. You'll notice that there's a fair bit budgeted in there. We have taken steps within the department to very closely monitor overtime in terms of the way the guys report back and how it's incurred. We are tracking it very closely. I will point out that in keeping with some of the discussion we had about the bank time available, that bank time has a potential dollar value somewhere in the neighborhood, rounding, of course, of $17,000. So my hope this year is that the 26K would be definitely and aggressively offset with bank time. So we'll be tracking it and see what kind of a conversation we have year end 2019 surrounding bank time. There has been some changes to try to really get a good tight handle on it to date. The other items, as far as winter control, you see the $66,000. That's our road sand, our road salt, stockpiling of those materials. And then I do have some contracted services. We do use external service providers in certain areas to assist. So it's a very small amount overall. But there is $10,000 budgeted for that, and that's consistent with what we incurred for 2018. So we think that's a reasonable amount. As far as sidewalks and parking lots, materials and supplies. Now this is a big jump from last year, and I want to point this out to council. I budgeted $11,500, and that would permit us the repair and replacement of approximately 110 meters worth of sidewalk. One thing our operations supervisor did last year is they went out and they identified deficiencies in sidewalk. We know we have some sections that either are what we would consider to be unsuitable or unsightly, or are impeding our ability to do sidewalk cleaning and removal. So we're trying to budget to move forward with both William and Blatt to address this. And that's why you're seeing that increase there. And I guess there could be the discussion on it, whether it's capital or not, but I stuck it in there for the time being. Now we get into, this one's a tricky one, a little bit more discussion perhaps. This is the roads administration. This first line you see is a fairly large salary line, and that basically is a portion of my salary, our operations supervisor salary, and the administrative assistant salary. So that's basically the management and administration piece surrounding public works itself. Now, when we get into sick days, stat days, vacation days,
Just a quick one. So Sean, as I typically do, I looked at 2017 compared to 2019, and you're telling me that's not a fair comparison because it's not the same people.
not the same people, not the same approach. The one thing that Kirk had pointed out, at that time, there was some sharing with the administrative person, and it really depends on where it's weighted as well.
Okay.
So
very clearly, if the public asks, they can't look at that at 97,000 and say, my God, you've gone up $25,000 in 2 years. That's because it's a different person and different. Okay.
the staffing complement remains the same. The way the staff is being allocated might be
Different. Okay.
And as a prime example, this year with all the changes to parks and properties, I pulled some of myself and some of our operations supervisor into that side as well.
Okay.
So the funds move based on the need.
Right.
I think what might help, based on that allocation is not think of it as allocating. Think of it as like when you look at wages and salaries and benefits, look at it the full complement of the department. Irregardless of whether they're doing winter control or whatever, you look at them as a whole complement and you can just say, well, that public works department 5 years ago had X number of full-time people and X number of part-time people. In 2018 or 19, they had this amount. Then you can at least compare the apples to apples comparison as opposed to looking at line by line and how it's allocated. And that's why I've said it would be more beneficial for council and the public to understand that, over the past 5 years, has salaries and benefits for public works or any department significantly went up, or is it just a discussion about allocation or sharing? And I think that's where I think you're going to see more of this question is, let's see when you look at wages and salaries, look at it as a whole in the department or a whole complement versus the allocation of internal departments.
Yep. Anyone else? Hey, Sean.
And in keeping with what Deputy Site just said, when you really look at the whole of public works, the net change, including the 2% that was embedded and step increases, was 3.4% or something like that. It's negligible, including annual steps and everything. So it's just moved to different locations. Yep. Now the next stretch, sick days, stat days, vacation days, bereavement days, very straightforward insofar as, aside from bereavement, it's clearly defined. So, we looked at each employee, their rate, their vacation allowance, their maximum sick time allowable, and the number generates itself. It's extremely straightforward.
Yes, go ahead.
For sick days, stat days, and vacation days, to almost double, you would have to either have twice as many employees or I don't see what the numbers fit.
It's the allocation. It's not necessarily, that's why I'm saying as a whole. It's not in public in roads administration that it changed to more people. It's just that grouping got more allocated than what it was in wages and roads and bridges. So in roads and bridges, the stats and stuff could have been there before because that's where they tracked stats and sick for the roads and bridges people.
Is that how it is, Sean?
Yes, and the other piece is I was fairly aggressive in some of the budgeting. Case in point, the sick days. I budgeted the full allocation. Now, as you can see in the actuals, my guys haven't been taking it. But I would rather say, okay, they, in a worst case pandemic year, we could incur the maximum amount. I budget for that. And certainly would expect that, barring unforeseen circumstances, they would take less. The only one I took a very cautious and conservative approach to was bereavement. So obviously, we all have entitlement, but we certainly don't want to budget for that sort of thing, right? So I did reduce that a little bit. But the big one you'll see, that's a perfect example, the sick days. It's
Statutory holidays from the actual paid out 27,500 and change, and you're budgeting 41,000. I don't think they've added any more statutory.
no, they haven't added any more stats. I would need some help from maybe Julie on that as to why it could be where it landed, but the one thing I did do is I pulled, we know we have 12 stats. I know what their salary is, and when you do that straightforward math, I get $41,531. So what I did is on this allocation sheet here, I pulled that out to make sure that it wasn't budgeted anywhere else. So as to why it's only showing 26, it would, maybe it's how it's recorded. I don't.
Just the same with vacation days. So, everybody go from 2 weeks to 4 weeks.
Yeah, there's been, really, I don't think there was any appreciable change in steps, so how it may have been recorded is different. I really don't know. Just fairly confident, or I'm very confident with these numbers because I looked at each employee individually and said that is their number.
I'm just going by, it just doubled.
Yeah, no, and I see that. I can't really speak to why the increase.
Go ahead, Trevor.
Yeah, but if you were look at each individual department and you were to look at the wages in the budget versus the actual, where it was is the budget included vacation and stats and all that stuff on each individual department, where we've pulled it out. And in this currently budget, some of it's been allocated because of the change in when Sean came and how they did the actuals when they did mid-year. It'll be just how they've allocated the costs associated to those types of things. It's not that we have any more or any less. It's just that the budget in each of those departments for wages included their general wage, all of the benefits incorporated to it, sick, stat, pay, all that stuff. And then in the actuals, they put it in a separate line as opposed to actually back to those departments.
Are you good with that, Kevin, or would you like, would you say your name was Julie to clarify that?
No, I understand the explanation to it. Yeah, no, I'm good.
You're good? Okay, go ahead.
Why did it happen last year? All this allocation stuff. Like, this is really hard to swallow. You almost have to paint a picture, Sean, of how this, like, for us to accept this. It doesn't make sense. Well, I guess it does if you divide how many days they're allowed and blah, blah, blah. But why didn't it happen last year?
To a certain extent, it could have been a different, like, I did the budget last year. I'm not sure, to be perfectly honest, how some of it got allocated out. I certainly took a more aggressive stance on sick time this year. And basically this year I had the time and the ability to look at each individual employee. So like I said, I've got every employee, I've got their rate, vacation, stat day, their sick time, and it gives me that total. So the number for this year, and the fact that, as Councillor Deputy Reeve had mentioned, this year everything is pulled into administration. Again, keeping with that whole idea of trying to tighten this budget up and make it very clear.
So next year it shouldn't change. Next year's budget.
You're absolutely right. The change next year should be based solely on step increases and your 2%. And that's why I was at the beginning, I said, I'm looking at this as a baseline budget because we're really, and as we get down into a couple of more areas down here, you're gonna see where further tighten it up, pulled stuff from one place to another and tried to look like centralize everything.
You said step increase and 2%. The 2% is the step increase, is
No.
it not?
There's two factors that can affect a wage. There's the annual CPI increase, which is right in the employee handbook. And that's the 2% that Donna was talking to you about. And then step increases are the employee's position on their range. So every year with proper performance, they'll move up a step, up to a limit of, I believe it's a 5-step system now. So when you're hired at the bottom of your range. And with each year, when you prove your competency, you move up one. So that's your step increase plus your CPI. And that only goes for, I believe it's a 5-step system. Yeah, so once they hit their maximum, then they just stay there. And a lot of my senior guys are already at their maximums.
Okay.
I've got some junior guys that are at step 2 of 5, 3 of 5. Okay, so again, patrol, training and health and safety. Those are two things that we tightened up from previous years. So now the patrol is specifically our required legislated obligation to have individuals in the truck 4 o'clock in the morning, checking the roads to make decisions, and that's all documented based on they record weather, they record conditions, and they'll make operational calls based on what they find when they're on patrol. The training, what we did is, you'll see it's fairly consistent with last year. That's any time that the employees are at our health and safety training, at any regulatory or required training, so we capture their time there instead of just kind of general roads or whatever. So we're trying to, the beauty of this is we can track the amount of training, and we can certainly, if ever questioned, we can show that we are investing in the employees because it's now a line item. Right? It continues to be a line item. Locates, that's the Ontario One Call piece, so we're tracking that there. Benefits are pretty self-explanatory. Clothing and uniforms, that's in keeping with the uniform policy. And that was based on discussions with our operations supervisor and lead hands to see what was required for this year. Subscriptions and memberships. I'll get back onto this. It's $2,700. And just so council understands that it's not arbitrary numbers, we've got AOR's memberships for myself, for our operations supervisor, and our 2 lead hands. We've got Ontario Good Roads membership for the township. We've got Huron County Road Supervisor Association membership and American Waterworks Association, which is tied to Ontario Waterworks Association membership. So outside of that, we've gotten rid of, like, there's everybody and their brother wants to sell you membership for something. We felt that this is the core membership, so we cut it down to that and that alone. Training, travel, and workshop, that's a big one, and you'll see that there's a huge increase here, so I'd like to kind of quickly go through that and run out of time. That includes a drainage superintendent course. We've got a surveying course for our operations supervisor, Canadian playground certification for 2 individuals. And currently, right now, the township only has 1 individual that has that training for the legislative required training, inspection of playground equipment. So we're trying to make sure that we have enough people trained so that we're not behind the 8 ball if that person's unavailable or sick or whatever. So that's that, and those are big training courses. These are one-time shots. We've got CRS training, so that's Canadian or Certified Road Superintendent training for our operations supervisor and our 2 lead hands. And that ties into ongoing training so that we can, we're calling that succession management. We want to make sure that these guys continue to elevate their training levels to CRS, CRSI, and seniors. I've got AMCTO training for our administrative assistant, as well as drainage assessment course, and that training will significantly help or enhance the level of service up front, because she works, of course, with the other administrative people up front. This gives her really the background in municipal administration, and I see it as a very, very healthy investment in kind of Huron's future as far as staffing. And then we've got HR downloads, departmental obligations. We've got $2,000 worth of training there, and also working at Heights training and chainsaw training for all the guys. So really kind of putting a heavy push on training for all the crew this year. And that's why you see that increase. It's fairly significant. Okay, so a lot of these things are kind of the insurances, that sort of thing. There's really not much to be said to it. Now, here's one that will catch people's eyes. We look at materials and supplies bumped up to $18,000. But you'll notice in roads facilities down below the next heading that the $10,000 was removed there. And this is one of the things I spoke about earlier, where that should be combined so that it's easier to track. And basically what that is, that's all our small tools. That's nuts, bolts, parts, pieces that Public Works uses on a day-to-day basis. That's postage and shipping, which, believe it or not, is a fairly large item. We do have memorials built into that, and I've got a small unanticipated expenditures amount built into that, approximately $30 million. Just for unanticipated expenses that seems to creep up on us every once in a while. Okay, so engineering, it's pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. We do use the local engineering firms fairly regularly within the department. Two big items to point out. We've got a transfer to reserve for equipment. Last year it was $16,000. This year we had budgeted $25,000. And then we've got a roads transfer to reserves of $25,000. That's one of the discussions that council would probably want to have.
So just on that one, there's a situation there that if we get up against a wall, that transfer could be done away with to save taxes.
It is absolutely right. It's a new transfer to reserves, in keeping with that whole idea that at some point we're going to start building those reserves.
Yep.
And, it becomes a decision council as to whether this is the year for that or not.
No, I just wondered that. Okay. And Donna, do all reserves fall under that, or just ones that are created this year?
No, like throughout the budget, you'll see people transferring to reserves, and some of them. So he's doing some for equipment and some for construction. Vicky has some for equipment. Like each of the departments have something in there for either equipment or capital items.
Okay, now this next one is highlighted on my page because I figured you'd take note of it. Drain assessments, $106,848. Now what that represents is the Whitfield drain, Hallahan drain, Scott drain, and then I've got $10,000 in there for additional maintenance requirements should they arise. Now, the one thing, and having Kirk here really works out well, the Whitfield drain is $60,000, but we're starting to think that it's unlikely to be a 2019 expense because we're waiting for the development. Yeah. So I would suggest that number can be reduced for 2019 by $60,000, which is a pretty big bite. That being said, it's going to rear its ugly head in 2020 in all probability. The benefit of holding off on this one is it allows the development to move forward a little bit so that we kind of see the impact of that development before we commit to the sections that we need.
But those drain assessments, are those drain assessments not recuperated through the taxation? Like, are they not assessed? Are these are actual our costs that we
Roads department pays 100% of any cost that goes across a municipal road.
okay.
Okay, so now, I guess we'll move on to roads facilities, and I'll speak even quicker. So when we look down here at the highlights again, to point out that the 15,000 that was budgeted last year for materials and supplies was taken out, it was moved up top. Really nothing else, I don't think, that's of any major significance in facilities. Gravel pit is an interesting one. And there's actually, Donna will cringe when I say this, but I have to ask her to add another line for me for licensing. Because this year we just actually received a $4,700 bill for aggregate licensing. So basically they charge you based on the amount of aggregate that you use from your own. Yeah. So I think it's prudent for us to create that line and start tracking it. I don't know where it may have been in years past. Didn't see it last year, but I signed it off today. So outside of that, though, you'll see that there is.
Use your own asset.
Yeah,
They charge you to use your own asset. That's a new thing.
who was doing that?
How do I get it? How can I do that?
The Ontario Aggregate Association.
Okay.
So it is regulated, and that probably helps cover some of the cost of regulation. They're monitoring that thing very frequently.
Go ahead.
Through you. I don't see any line on here for rehabilitation. Has there been any money set aside for rehabilitation?
It's a fantastic question, and actually the second, the $2,500 fee is actually the first step in that, and that's actually for survey. Because we're right at the front end of trying to deal with this. We had meetings with them last year in 2018. The rehab costs are going to be brutal on this thing, but we feel that we've got quite a bit of aggregate left in it. Have to start looking forward because, and this is, I'm actually very glad you asked the question. The expectation is when we're done with this gravel pit, it gets returned to bush. So, we've been trying to get our head around this, and we're going to probably in the next year for 2020, we'll come in with some engineering costs, but we have, and some hydrogeological. So we did find out that if we go to a below water table operation, it actually will help us in the long run. We'll get more aggregate out, plus it becomes a wetland or water feature, as we'll call it. So we're still working through those details, but the surveying is a very preliminary first step. And then the other line item that I've got in there is simple fencing. So trying to really, our operations supervisor's been spending a lot of time trying to get that. It's the start of a frustrating process. Once we bring the hydrogeologists into the cost of this. Crossing guard, nothing of any significance there, real significance there.
Go ahead.
That's where you're at. It almost doubled. From 12,000 to 20,000 on the budget, the 12,000 actual to 20,000?
Yeah, we're still, I can look into that as to why, but when you look at the budget, we based it on our hours and actually a small change overall. I can find out why the actuals are over the 12,000. That's very interesting. I'll actually get that. Okay, now the next one is an interesting one. This is the, we'll call it the clawback from that whole equipment, vehicle and equipment approach, where each vehicle was its own cost center. So what we've done is we've pulled everything back, and you'll see that I did bump up the salaries. Again, that ties to that whole allocation thing, but we saw that that's where the guys are putting a lot of time trying to maintain the fleet, so we're capturing it better now. As far as materials and supplies, we're at 71.5, 86,000 for contracted services. It sounds like a lot of money, but we do have a fairly aging fleet, and as such, we figured that was an appropriate amount. And then I've got 125,000 for fuel. Our actuals for fuel, that 56,000 is not reflective. You have to look back up at the facilities. For some reason, $48,000 worth of fuel was captured in the facility. So when you add the two of them up, we're well over the 100,000. The 125 just compensates for a change in market should the price of fuel go back up. If it doesn't go up, then we'll budget on it. And then special events, that's basically your Remembrance Day parade, Santa Claus parade, those special events that require public works input for, be it set up, tear down, road closures, that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, that special events, I think that came from previous councillor Knott really had wanted council to get more information about costs associated to the department that were helping with special events, Muskrat Festival, those types of things, so that we can incorporate to understand our true cost of having those events. Because if you didn't have public works or those costs, you wouldn't have those events as well. So.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any questions there for Sean on Public Works? So if not, then I think we'll probably use this as a good spot to break for tonight, and you can follow your procedures to move into closed session. So we each have made a few notes of some things that we'll look up for you for next round for sure. So tomorrow night, then we're going to start off again at 6 p.m. with finishing up Sean's budget. And then we'll move through both Vicky and Val, and then we'll finish up by through economic development and planning and the loans, and then we'll have a good discussion on capital tomorrow night as well. Okay, so that's where we're headed. Does council, yes?
Can you read? Do we have a line item for the total dollars moving towards reserves?
We don't in here as yet, but we do a whole night on reserve. So, I mean, I can get you that as well.
Well, it's just important for us to have it always sort of, adding up as we move along, because like we've barely said, where do we go if the budget's too high?
Oh, for sure.
Start cutting, it's nice to know what that is.
Yep. Okay, so overall, how'd you get along first night, Henry?
Well, I'm glad because I had about 10,000 check marks there that somebody said they changed everything around from one year to the other. Because I was looking at this going, where's this coming from? How do you go from here to there? Yeah. This is ridiculous. Where did any of this come from? So I'm very glad you pointed that out before we started, because I was like, wow.
Yeah, it's been very difficult to, with the whole shared services, as we said, we went from some fairly basic budgets, easy to understand, to almost building in like a whole work tracker into your ledger. And so we created 300 accounts, I guess, is what they wanted for shared services. And then, and we changed the timesheets at least 6 or 7 times that year for the guys to try to manage all of that. And then at the end of shared services, we said, well, this isn't working anyway with the, all that tracking. And so Sean, when he came along, wanted a much more simplified approach, but what we'd like to do is keep it the same for 2 years, so we've got some good data.
Sorry, yeah, I would like to give a congratulatory support to what you're doing here. With what we have in front of us here, if you wanted to spend the time, you could track $10.
Yeah, you can.
Where some of the other budgets that I've gone back and looked through, we're looking for $10,000 where to go. Here you can, this department, it's finite. It's right down.
It is, yeah.
It's right down to the cents. So
You give each one of us our computer, and we can tell you where that $10 is too.
Well, and it's great information.
Well, that's good, thank you. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow night, we'll give you a break. Yeah. Oh, good. Oh, hanging in there?
Hey, guys.
Paul, how are you doing? Hanging in?
Guys, I need hey, everybody.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Let's gotta call you to order.
I'm not sure how to stick around for in camera, but don't everybody take off on this.
Anita?
She's just going to the washroom, I think. That's why I started should listen tonight. Yes. Oh, pardon me?
We're still going here, but we have
Yeah, so, wonder if we should do that before, Sean, your pre-budget. Yeah, so your pre-budget approval should be part of open. So
Yes,
we should take a few minutes and do it before close.
Now or after tomorrow?
No, I think you
Right
should,
now is fine, and it won't take long with everything. That's pretty, that was straightforward.
yeah, we will. Oh, we're gonna have to see what's the matter with this thing. I'll move it.
Fortunately, I can't pause the mic. Can't pause it, but once you pause
I think to the need to the washer that way.
Well, listen, 1, 2, 3, 4, we got it. We're gonna move to number 5, pre-budget approval request. So we're still going here. So we're going on to number 5. We have a stop quorum here. Pre-budget approval request.
You want me to just speak to it?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you, Reed Bailey. This will be the first of possibly many pre-budget approval requests. Standard procedure, if it's something that's time sensitive, we'll bring it forward for consideration to council before the rest of the budget's done. And basically, this one is extremely time sensitive. It has to do with the road reconstruction project for Carling Terrace. The reason it's being brought forward now is that because this is the first project to arise out of that long-term capital plan, we obviously didn't have time to look at that pre-engineering or anything like that. So we're not, by any stretch of the imagination, shovel ready. And we need to get, if we're going to do it this year, we got to get tender put together and get it out there quickly so that we get competitive bids. This one, in discussion with Donna, we felt it was an easy one to bring forward, largely because of the way it's funded. This particular project does not impact taxation, so it doesn't put kind of an unnecessary or unfair pressure on the council by bringing it forward early. Basically, to do the job, our estimate is $663,000 to do the one block, and that's the block from Diagonal up to Corner, with a little bit of tie-in of storm system on Corner. The way that's broken out, $321,930 of that whole project would come from the OSIP formula-based funding. And that's, is everybody familiar with OSIP? It's the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund. And what they did for a number of years now is they've, based on our size and a fairly extensive formula, they've come up with a dollar value for the municipality to apply towards infrastructure work, this type of project. So basically, we have $321,930 for that. Donna had broken out $331,500 towards user pay, which again doesn't impact taxation at all. And I believe there's a very small amount, $9,570, that would actually, we would have to recover from taxation. So out of the $663,000, you're looking at a $10,000 impact on taxation. If council deems it acceptable and get pre-budget approval, my first call tomorrow would be to BM Ross. They would begin immediately putting together some design and start working on the tender so that we can get this thing out and get it tendered as early in the year as possible, which would again allow us to be competitive. And just for those that aren't familiar, typically the way it works, the first one off away from the gate gets the most attention from qualified bidders. So they'll be after this one. If you put a tender out later in the year, you put it out in the May, June, July. By then, most of the really more established contractors have already got their year booked, so they're probably not going to bid on it. If they are going to bid on it, they're going to make it worth their while. Because they're going to have to go and get additional resources to do the job. Past experience, we get the best price and the best contractors if we can get out early. That's why we're January 15th and asking for $600,000.
So can I have somebody move that the Carling Terrace rehabilitation?
It's a complete, so it's road, water, sanitary, and so on.
Rehabilitation be pre-approved, budget pre-approved. Do I have someone who will move that?
I'll move it.
Mr. Sipes? Mr. Heffer, seconds. Discussion. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. 6, closed session. So at this time, we're going to take a 5-minute break. And when we come back, we'll be in closed session. Can I get a motion? Mr. Sipes and Kevin.
Yeah, I had to go to.